I am Lindsay Russell, 31 years old, and a marketing consultant who just launched my own business. Growing up in a wealthy Savannah family meant high expectations and rigid traditions. This year had been tough since leaving my father's investment firm to start my own company. As I arrived at my parents' home, clutching a homemade strawberry pie, they blocked the doorway with cold expressions. "You are not invited," my father said flatly. Through the gap, I spotted my sister Rebecca, Uncle Gary, and even my best friend Emily laughing around the table. That was the moment I knew life had changed forever. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more real family drama stories that will make you rethink loyalty. The stately white stone house on Savannah Hill, where I grew up, represented everything about my family. Sundays meant St. John's at 9, brunch at the club at 11, and a drive by the river afterwards so my mother could wave at people who mattered. At the center of that air was Russell and Sons, the family law firm with a name that pretended daughters didn't exist. The brass plaque on Whitaker Street gleamed like a metal pin to my father's chest. He was Douglas in public and Dad only in private when he wanted something done without question. He moved through rooms with the sternness of a judge, shoulders squared, tie straight, verdict already written on his face. My mother, Betty, was the curator of our reputation. She ironed our lives as carefully as she ironed napkins, removing wrinkles before anyone else could see them. She never raised her voice, because her looks did the lifting. If my posture slipped, if my laugh was half an octave too loud, her hand would graze my wrist, delicate, practiced, and I would correct myself. "We are Russells," she liked to say, which meant more than a last name. It meant we hosted the right people, sponsored the right galas, and never left the house with chipped nail polish. My sister Rebecca perfectly fit that world. She was firstborn, Yale-bound, and calibrated for admiration. By senior year, she was president of 3 clubs, captain of 1 team, and crowned at cotillion in a white dress that made my mother misty. If I needed help with a history essay, Rebecca was busy with mock trial. If I asked to borrow her sweater, she said it wasn't my color, and somehow that sounded like a diagnosis. I learned young that affection at our house was a currency with exchange rates. Straight A's were worth less in me than a polite B+ in Rebecca. A ribbon from my art fair evaporated beside her debate trophies. But I was good at noticing people and choosing the words that softened edges. "Marketing," I said at 17, flush with the thrill of finding something that made sense of me. But my father didn't even look up from the paper. "A job for losers," he said, as if he was commenting on the weather. Luxury and coldness coexisted like twin lamps on our buffet. We ate off china, but conversation felt like walking on eggshells. The table glowed with candlesticks on holidays, somewhere between grace and dessert. The balance sheet of our worth was tallied, who got into what program, who said what to whom at the junior league, which Russell child had added shine to the family crest. In high school, I interned at the firm, filing briefs and fetching coffee for men who called me kiddo and didn't learn my name. I liked the feeling of the lobby, cool marble, leather chairs, but I learned the back corridors better, the places where the real conversations happened. I was the one who noticed the receptionist's tone soften when certain clients called, the way partners chose different colognes for different juries, the way a color on a brochure could make nervous people breathe easier. At home, my mother curated me like a room that kept refusing to match the furniture. She moved me through tennis lessons and etiquette classes, convinced polish could make up for temperament. When I spoke up, she called it tone. When I was quiet, she called it mood. And sometimes I felt like wallpaper in a stranger's life. After graduating college with my degree in marketing, I knew I didn't want to spend my 20s floating between odd jobs, like many of my friends did. I wanted stability, proof that I belonged somewhere. And though I had sworn to myself that I wouldn't let my father's law firm swallow me whole, I eventually gave in to the pull of Russell and Sons. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was habit. Or maybe it was the faint hope that if I proved myself valuable enough, my parents would finally look at me the way they looked at Rebecca. I started in what my father mockingly called the soft side of the business. Customer relations, marketing, promotion, the very things he insisted had no real weight in law. He had always said cases are won in the courtroom, not on brochures. But in the years I worked there, I showed him that contracts don't walk in by themselves. People do. And people respond to how they're treated. At first, my role was small, answering phones, updating the dusty website, designing pamphlets that still carried the same outdated fonts from the 90s. But I didn't stop there. I networked at luncheons, I researched potential clients, I modernized our materials, and little by little, I built relationships that turned into retainers worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Over 6 years, I transformed what was once a neglected corner of the firm into a thriving department. I brought in real money, dozens of large contracts, many of them clients my father had chased unsuccessfully for years. Still, recognition never came. Every time I tried to present results, my father would dismiss them with a wave of his hand. You just make pretty brochures. Your sister does the real work. Rebecca, of course, was now one of the firm's rising attorneys, always held up as the gold standard. The irony burned. My work paid for her courtroom theatrics, yet I was treated as though I'd simply decorated the office walls. The humiliation only deepened when Emily came into the picture. Emily had been my best friend since freshman year of college. We'd pulled all-nighters together, shared ramen in a cramped dorm, and promised we'd always have each other's backs. When she was looking for a job, I recommended her for a position in administration at the firm. I thought it would be perfect, working side by side, making our mark together. At first, it was comforting having her there. Lunch breaks filled with laughter, inside jokes whispered during dull meetings, the sense of solidarity I desperately needed in that cold building. But to my shock, my parents seemed to adore her more than me. My mother called her the daughter I never had, a cruel joke that landed like a knife in my chest. My father listened to her suggestions with a patience he never extended to me. Rebecca, who could barely tolerate me, invited Emily to her bridal shower, her baby shower, her charity luncheons. It was as if Emily had slipped seamlessly into the slot I'd never been able to fill. I swallowed my hurt, convincing myself it didn't matter as long as Emily and I remained close. But there were moments, quiet, painful ones, when I caught the way my parents looked at her, their faces warm and approving, so different from the icy appraisal they reserved for me. Once, after I presented the firm's annual marketing report, my father dismissed my work in front of the partners. But then, when Emily suggested a minor clerical adjustment to the filing system, he praised her for her sharp eye. I smiled tightly, clapping along with the others, but inside, something crumbled. The deeper I became involved in the business, the more invisible I felt in my own family. My contracts were written off as luck. My strategies were mocked as fluff. Even when clients specifically requested me, my father insisted that Rebecca or another partner take the lead. And yet, I couldn't walk away. Not then. The firm was my tether to belonging, the last chance to prove I was worth more than the second-choice daughter, the spare Russell. Every signature I secured, every client I won, I hoped would finally make my father proud. Instead, it only widened the chasm. Rebecca became the legal star, Emily became the adopted daughter, and I, despite everything I had built, remained the family's disappointment. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I had been putting together a presentation for a major client, a developer from Atlanta, and needed updated financials to show the firm's stability and transparency. The partners liked to brag about those words. They made for glossy slides and reassured nervous investors. I logged into the shared drive, fully expecting to find the usual balance sheets and quarterly reports. Instead, I stumbled into a folder I had never seen before, tucked beneath a mislabeled directory. At first, I thought it was just clutter, duplicate files, mislabeled spreadsheets. But curiosity made me click. What I found didn't add up. There were accounts in the Cayman Islands and Bermuda, transactions listed under names I didn't recognize, and duplicate trusts that mirrored legitimate ones, but with subtle differences in beneficiaries. Some documents showed withdrawals that had no explanation, large sums of money moving in and out of shell corporations with addresses that didn't exist on Google Maps. My first instinct was confusion. Why would a respected law firm need offshore transfers? Why were there two trusts with the same client's name, but with different account numbers? I printed a handful of pages and spread them across my desk, trying to make sense of it all. The numbers danced in front of me, and the more I studied them, the colder my stomach felt. That evening, I gathered the documents and walked into my father's office. His desk, as always, was perfectly ordered, pens aligned, files stacked with military precision, his diplomas staring down from the wall like guards. I placed the papers in front of him and said, "Dad, I think there's a mistake. Look at these withdrawals. They don't match the reports we've been showing clients." His reaction was instant and violent. He snatched the papers out of my hands so quickly that the edges scraped my skin. His face flushed red, his jaw tightening the way it did when he was about to unleash anger. "These matters," he said in a clipped, icy tone, "are beyond your understanding. Focus on business cards and advertising. Leave the rest to people who know what they're doing." I tried to protest, but these accounts. "Enough, Lindsay." His voice cracked like a whip. He shoved the papers into a drawer and slammed it shut. "Your job is to make us look good. Nothing more. Don't overstep again." The dismissal stung worse than any insult. It wasn't just that he refused to explain, it was the look in his eyes. For the first time, I saw fear there, quickly masked by fury. Fear that I had seen something I wasn't supposed to. From that day forward, everything changed. My access to the shared drive was quietly revoked. Passwords were reset without explanation. Files that used to appear on my desk no longer did. Rebecca, meanwhile, began attending the very meetings I had spent weeks preparing for. The Atlanta developer presentation I had built from scratch? She delivered it while I was told to stick to promotional materials. I noticed other shifts too. Emily started receiving more confidential tasks, drafting memos for the partners, sitting in on closed-door discussions. She would come back to our shared lunch breaks looking guilty, saying things like, "It's just boring legal stuff, you wouldn't care." But I knew better. I recognized the pattern. I was being pushed out, slowly, deliberately, until I no longer had a place at the table. But unease gnawed at me even more. The documents I had seen weren't just beyond my understanding. They were wrong. I may not have been a lawyer, but I understood enough about money to know that duplicate trusts and offshore transfers weren't standard practice for a family law firm in Savannah. The thought that my father and sister might be hiding something illegal, kept me awake at night. So I tried to bring it up again, gently, with Rebecca. One evening after work, I caught her in the parking lot and asked if she knew anything about the duplicate accounts. She gave me a sharp look, the kind that cut deeper than words, and said, "You're imagining things. Stop digging where you don't belong." Then she got into her car and drove away without another word. It was the final confirmation I needed. I wasn't crazy. They were hiding something. And they were united in making sure I stayed out of it. In the weeks that followed, I played along, acting as though I hadn't noticed. I continued designing campaigns, organizing events, smiling at clients. But inside, a quiet resolve was forming. I had been treated like an outsider in my own family for years, but this was different. This wasn't about favoritism or insults. This was about secrets that could destroy everything if they came to light. And whether my father liked it or not, I had already seen too much. The contract with the Atlanta developer landed on a Wednesday morning. I had been courting them for months, site visits, dinners where I tracked which appetizers actually got eaten, drafts of proposals translated from legalese into human, and I could feel it crusting. Their COO, a detail-obsessed woman named Dana, liked that I remembered the names of her project managers and sent recap emails that didn't read like threats. She said my approach made a terrifying line item feel like a partnership. We met at a downtown boutique hotel because the conference rooms at the firm were always booked for partner meetings. I wore the navy dress that said competent and unthreatening, the one my mother approved of years ago, though she never knew it became my armor. I laid out the final deck, walked through timelines and escalation paths, answered questions about messaging around zoning hearings, and because I had learned to read the room, left 6 minutes of silence for them to catch up emotionally. Dana looked at her general counsel, then back at me. Let's do it, she stated. Full retainer, 12 months, option to renew. We want you as the point of contact. I felt the rush start in my chest and settle in my hands. You'll have me, I said, keeping my voice steady. We signed 2 blue ink signatures that changed everything. I walked out into the damp morning light with a copy of the contract and an absurd desire to cry from relief. For years my father had chased this developer and failed. I had flipped a door he insisted was sealed. By the time I reached the office, word had already moved faster than the elevator. Partners peered over glasses, the receptionist gave me a thumbs up, and even the paralegals in records clapped. I took the contract straight to my father. He was standing behind his desk, perfectly composed, the blinds slicing his face into pale stripes. We got them, I said, setting the folder down like a gift. Full retainer. They want me as lead on communications. He didn't smile. He didn't ask for details. He flipped the pages as if searching for a trap and then looked up, eyes gone hard. What did you promise him? He asked, the pronoun wrong and pointed. Did you sell the family honor? The words hit me like a shove. What? Dad, What did you trade? His voice rose, controlled fury. Discounts? Confidential information? Yourself? I stood frozen, the contract suddenly heavy, the room suddenly airless. I promised them clarity, I said, every syllable deliberate. A timetable. Honest messaging. Dignity. That's it. He clicked the folder shut and pushed it back toward me as if it were dirty. There will be no you as a point of contact, he said. Your sister will take the external meetings. You will draft whatever she requires. I heard myself ask, quietly, why? Because you don't understand where the line is, he said. And I won't have you dragging our name through mud with marketing theatrics. He waved his hand like he was shooing a fly. Close the door on your way out. I don't remember the walk back to my desk, only the feeling of my face burning and the click of my heels counting out a decision I wasn't ready to admit. For the rest of the week, I went through motions, welcome packets, brand guidelines, onboarding calls scheduled, and then reassigned to Rebecca without explanation. The developer emailed, "Will Lindsay be on the call?" and received a reply from the firm. "Rebecca Russell will represent us." No mention of me. I drafted talking points anyway. I left them on Rebecca's chair with a post-it that said, "Use what you like." She sent a curt text back, "Got it." No thank you. No acknowledgement. 2 weeks. That's how long it took for the humiliation to harden into certainty. On the Friday of the second week, I printed my resignation letter on firm stationery because I wanted the crest to stare back at him while he read it. I walked into my father's office at 4:15 p.m., the hour he considered too late to start something and too early to go home. He looked up, impatient. "I'm resigning," I said, placing the letter down. "Effective immediately." He didn't touch it. "Don't be dramatic." "I'm not," I said. "I'm done." "You'll come crawling back," he said, almost bored. "The market doesn't reward hobbies." I held his gaze. "Yes, but I'm not a hobby." Then I turned and left before he could find a worse way to make me smaller. I called the Atlanta developer first. I told Dana I was leaving the firm and starting my own agency, that I would understand if they wanted to stay put. There was a quiet on the line that made my stomach drop, and then she said, "We hired you. Not your letterhead. Just send the new agreement." By Monday, I had an LLC, a domain, and a borrowed desk at a co-working space that smelled like coffee and hope. Russell Creative Group. I kept the Russell because I refused to cede my own name, even if my family believed they owned it. I built a website at midnight, called the printers at dawn, and sent notices to every client I had personally brought through our doors. I did not poach, I invited. "If you'd like to continue working with me directly," I wrote, "here is where I'll be." And they came. Not all at once, not all of them, but enough. The boutique medical practice that liked how I handled their community backlash. The regional nonprofit whose board chair trusted my late-night drafts. A mid-tier manufacturer tired of being talked down to. There were signatures, deposits, relief. I furnished my tiny office with a Craigslist table and a plant that didn't die, and for the first time in years, I breathed like the air belonged to me. Then the blowback began. My mother stopped answering calls. She didn't text back, didn't send recipes, didn't like anything. I half expected a formal notice printed on her embossed stationery. You are no longer invited to the idea of us. Rebecca wrote a letter, 3 pages, single-spaced, the kind of document only a lawyer would send to a sister. How dare I undercut the firm? How dare I capitalize on the Russell name while abandoning the Russells? She included lines about loyalty and legacy that sounded eerily like our father, and a paragraph about non-solicitation norms that wasn't technically legal language but felt like a prelude. My father didn't bother with sentiment. He left me a voicemail, his tone flat with warning. Return any proprietary materials and provide a list of clients you have contacted. If you continue, I will see you in court. I played it once, then again, and then saved it, not as leverage, but as a reminder that I had finally stopped negotiating for a kindness that was never coming. I wrote a short response through counsel a friend recommended, professional, factual, non-combative. I had taken no files, only relationships I had cultivated, and I had every right to build my own book of business. In the midst of all this, my cousin Alex texted and asked to meet. We chose a bar off Broughton where no one from the firm ever went because the cocktails were too inventive. He arrived in his usual baseball cap, eyes scanning the door the way Russells do when they expect heat. Over beers we didn't finish, he leaned in and said, almost a whisper, "They're talking about you like you're the enemy. Something's seriously wrong with the company." I felt the sentence settle in my bones like a truth I had been circling. Wrong with the company, not just with me. Wrong in ways my father's fury couldn't hide and my sister's polish couldn't fix. I walked back to my tiny office under a sky the color of pewter, unlocked the door, and turned on the lamp that made the room feel less provisional. My phone buzzed with another client asking for a proposal, using my new email, saying my first name like it meant the whole person. Whatever storm was gathering around the firm, I knew this. I had stepped onto my own ground. And even if it shook, at least it would be because of my own footsteps. Despite everything that had already split us apart, I still baked the pie. I woke early, tied on grandmother's faded apron, and sifted flour the way she taught me light hands. Don't bully the dough. I hulled the strawberries, tossed them with sugar and lemon zest, and lined the glass dish with a crust I'd chilled overnight. While it baked, the apartment filled with that warm, patient smell of butter and fruit. I set the pie on the rack, glossy and bubbling, and told myself this was the bridge back. I bought a good bottle of Pinot, one my mother had approved of once at a charity tasting, and laid out the pale blue dress she'd called presentable. I curled my hair under and dabbed on the lipstick she favored, the one she said made me look less tired. If appeasement had a uniform, I wore it. Savannah was cold bright that morning, the kind of November sun that looks warm and isn't. I drove past Forsyth Park, past families carrying foil pans and bouquet-wrapped flowers, past tourists lining up for pralines. My hands were steady on the wheel, the pie buckled into the passenger seat like a fragile child. I rehearsed something neutral to say, "Happy Thanksgiving." I brought Nana's pie. "I'd like to talk after dinner." The closer I got to my parents' house, the more I felt that small, stubborn hope trying to stand upright. The house looked magazine perfect, wreath with gold ribbon, topiaries clipped into submission, a brass knocker polished to a mirror. I could see candlelight moving in the hallway like a heartbeat. I balanced the pie on my hip, gripped the wine, and rang the bell. Footsteps. The latch. And then, my parents in their Sunday best, frozen in the doorway as if I were a solicitor who'd wandered onto the wrong porch. My mother's smile cut clean as a paper edge. My father's voice was a measured blade. "You're not invited." For a second, I thought I had misheard him. The word "not" rang in my head like a gone-off timer. Heat crawled up my neck. I managed. "It's Thanksgiving." "Not for you," he said, lower now, like a warning. My mother adjusted the pearl at her throat and said nothing. Through the narrow opening, the scene had already begun without me. The dining table dressed in white linen, the good china, a spray of autumn leaves down the runner. Music floated from the speakers, Ella Fitzgerald, of course. Laughter swelled and broke like surf. And there, impossibly ordinary in her soft sweater, Emily was sitting in my place. She turned, saw me, then looked away, her face arranging itself into that careful shape people wear when they don't want to be seen choosing. Rebecca stood at the far end in a cream dress, chin lifted, watching me with the satisfaction of someone who has set the table and the trap. I shifted the pie to both hands to stop the trembling. I wanted to say a million small, reasonable things. I came to make peace. We're still family. Nana would hate this, but the door had already started to close. My father added, "We'll speak another time, the way judges say next case." The lock caught. The porch swallowed the echo. I stood there listening to my heartbeat and to Ella singing about love as if it were simple. The smell of roasted turkey drifted under the door. Someone clinked a glass. Someone, Rebecca, laughed too loudly. The cold bit through my tights. A neighbor across the street arranged pumpkins on her steps and didn't look at me. It took a full minute before I remembered the wine in my numb hand. I set the bottle on the top step and walked back to my car with the pie held level, like a ceremony I refused to drop. Inside the car, the silence cracked me open. My breath came shallow, that embarrassing hiccup cry I hadn't made since I was a kid. Mascara blurred. I tasted salt and pastry on my tongue. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel and let myself be ridiculous for exactly 30 seconds. I drove without the radio, letting the city move around me. Downtown, couples posed in front of wrought iron gates. I caught my reflection in a shop window at a red light, tidy dress, smeared makeup, a woman holding a holiday she wasn't allowed to enter, and I almost laughed. By the time I reached the square near my apartment, the tears had cooled into something else. Anger is often messy in our family, thrown words, doors slammed, but mine arrived clean and precise, like a file clicking into a drawer. The cold outside had moved in and settled under my ribs. If they had written me off, if they had replaced me at my own family table with my best friend and my sister's triumph, then the rules I'd lived by were null. I owed them no more careful silences, no more curated appearances, no more protection of the image they polished. In the quiet afterward, I looked at my phone lighting up with nothing from them. The secrets I'd carried, the numbers that didn't add, the duplicate trusts, the offshore transfers, were not favors owed. They were weights I didn't have to hold for people who would lock me out on Thanksgiving. If they could exile me from a meal, I could exile myself from their lies. So I rinsed my fork, closed the blinds, and sat at my kitchen table with my back straight and my eyes finally clear. I carried the stack to the table, spread everything out, and let the fluorescent hum of the stove light keep me company. The pattern came into view. Falsified quarterly reports, one version destined for clients and lenders, another for internal review. Wire instructions to accounts in places that existed mainly for secrecy: St. George's, Road Town, Georgetown. Duplicate trusts with near-identical names and clerical tweaks in beneficiaries that redirected money to shelf companies that held nothing but mailboxes. Notes about temporary concealment of short-term liabilities, which is a poetry of fraud if you say it quickly enough. Buried in the exhibits were consulting fees that moved like laundry through subsidiaries no one at the firm ever spoke about aloud. I kept reading until the margins blurred. I set aside a folder just for the Robertson Fund, a client whose glossy brochure about legacy philanthropy I had proudly produced. There were internal memos showing debt parked off balance sheet, repayment schedules shuffled like playing cards, and emails where questions from auditors were forwarded with the subject line handle. My stomach went cold and flat. I was not a lawyer, but I knew what I was looking at, a machine designed to make money disappear long enough to look healthy. I opened another smaller folder of printed emails and correspondences I had forwarded to myself at odd hours. The worst of it was not the numbers, it was the sentences. My father's clipped directives. Rebecca's precise, efficient acquiescence. And then the one that made my hands shake when I found it weeks ago, now doubly stark under the kitchen light. Restrict Lindsay's access to the Robertson Fund. Emily is helping to distract her with new presentations. My name in their mouths like a problem to be managed. And Emily's name braided into the tactic. They hadn't merely decided I was unimportant. They had engineered my ignorance. I took photos with my phone first, just in case. Then I pulled my old scanner out from under the desk, dusted it with the sleeve of my dress, and watched the blue bar travel down page after page, a slow, relentless confession. Somewhere between the second and third pile, I called Jason Miller. We'd met at a conference years ago, seated next to each other during an ethics panel that put half the room to sleep. He works at the Securities and Exchange Commission's regional office, mid-level bureaucrat with a conscience, he jokes, and we'd kept a cordial acquaintanceship that consisted mostly of once-a-year coffees. I had never asked him for more than an opinion on a headline. He picked up on the second ring. "Lindsay? I need to see you," I said, voice flattening so it wouldn't break. "It's about my family's firm. I have documents. It's not small." He didn't ask for gossip. He asked for addresses, dates, whether I was safe. Then, "Can you meet me at 8 tomorrow morning? No firm devices. Bring printed copies and digital backups. And, Lindsay, don't tell anyone you called me." "I already didn't," I said. "Thank you." After we hung up, I went back to the work because the only thing that kept the anger from eating me alive was turning it into order. I renamed files with dates and clear labels, created an index in a spreadsheet, and cross-referenced email timestamps with transfers. I flagged anything that looked like deliberate concealment, temporary reclassification, special purpose, bridge accounts, timing mismatch, phrases so careful they sounded innocent until you put them next to movement of 7 figures at odd hours. At 11:40 p.m., I zipped the scans into 2 encrypted folders, one for regulators, one for investors whose capital had been paraded around our conference room as proof of the firm's prestige. I wrote a short cover note, no adjectives, no personal grievances, stating what the files contained: evidence suggesting falsified reporting, fictitious transfers through offshore entities, concealment of short-term debts, and internal correspondence directing the restriction of my access to client funds. I paused before sending, my finger hovering over the trackpad. This was not a family argument. This was the detonator. I pictured my father's face when I had handed him the papers. I pictured Rebecca's look in the parking lot. I pictured Emily at the table tonight, the space where my plate should have been reflecting candlelight. Somewhere, a siren threaded the night. I clicked send to Jason's secure address with the subject, Preliminary Materials, Russell and Sons, then blind copied the general intake for the SEC, and, because lying to people who trusted us had been the first crime, forwarded investor packets to every fund and entity I could identify from my index. The confirmations landed like small hammers. Received, received, received. I placed 2 USB drives into separate envelopes, one for Jason, one for a safety deposit box in the morning, and sealed them with tape. By 1:10 a.m., the apartment was a map of everything they'd hoped I would never see. I made tea I wouldn't drink and opened the window a crack. The city smelled like cold and damp leaves. I set an alarm for 6:30, emailed my cousin Alex a single line, meeting with someone in the morning. Don't text me tonight. And turned off the stove light. I slid the lock, set the scanner on the chair like a faithful dog, and lay down fully clothed. The news broke before sunrise. My phone lit up in a jittery staccato, alerts from business blogs, then the Savannah morning shows, then national tickers folding our family name into their scrolling crawl. SEC opens inquiry into Russell and Sons. Irregularities in trust management alleged. By 8 a.m., a local anchor said the state exchange had suspended trading in the holding company that managed our ancillary entities, pending further disclosure. I watched with my mug cooling in my hands as a drone shot of the Whitaker Street building hovered on screen, elegant and suddenly pathetic. Jason texted, "I've got it. Keep your phone on." A beat later, Alex, "It's a fire. Be safe." I didn't go near the office. I didn't want the smugness they would paste onto my face like a mask, didn't want to be photographed walking past the columns. Still, through friends and former colleagues, the updates poured in, partners huddled behind closed doors, the receptionist fielding a siege of calls, junior associates carrying bankers' boxes to conference rooms like obedient ants. Someone said my father had thrown a stapler, a small, tight arc, controlled rage. Rebecca, in a navy suit, had drifted between rooms like a bailiff. Emily sat at her desk with her hands folded and her eyes bright, The way you look when you're trying not to cry because there are too many witnesses. By noon, clients began to panic. A pediatric practice asked for their files back. The Atlanta Developers Council sent a 2-line email, non-judgmental, surgical, requesting a list of escrow accounts for verification. A private foundation announced it was temporarily suspending all new work with outside counsel. The words began to stack on one another. Temporary, suspending, verification, the vocabulary of a tide going out. I turned the television off and walked the length of the apartment, the way you do on a phone call when you're waiting for the other person to say the thing you don't want to hear. My anger from the night before had cooled into something steadier, a spine I could finally feel. At 3, my building's intercom buzzed 5 times in quick succession. I knew before I stood what I would see. I let them up because there would be no containing this to the hallway. My father came first, coat unbuttoned, jaw set, my mother right behind, face already wet, cardigan draped like sorrow, Rebecca in that navy suit from The Whispers, clutching a leather folder, Emily last, smaller than I remembered from last night's doorway, eyes red, hands empty. For a moment they stood there, looking not like a family, but like the cast of a trial play. "Turn that off," my father said, flicking his hand at the silent TV. I didn't move. He advanced a step. "You're going to withdraw the complaint." I kept my back to the window and my voice level. "It doesn't work like that." "It works however we decide," he said, each word polished, dangerous. "You will contact whoever you contacted, and you will say you were mistaken, that you misunderstood internal protocols." My mother made a soft, wounded sound. "Lindsay," she said, my name stretched through tears, "do you have any idea what you've done to our reputation? To Rebecca's? To the families who trusted us? People are calling me, your godmother called me, the club," she pressed a tissue to her mouth. "You have ruined us." Rebecca stepped forward, composed. "No one needs to be ruined," she said evenly. "There is a path to minimize the damage. We can contain this if you cooperate." She placed the leather folder on my table and slid it toward me. "Dad and I discussed allocating you a share in the business. A meaningful share. You'd have a seat on the advisory board. No more marginalizing you, this corrects that. In exchange, you retract and you sign a statement clarifying that your materials were preliminary and incomplete." I looked at the folder and then at her. "You think I can be bought?" She didn't flinch. "I think you're angry and we all did things wrong, and this is a way out for everyone." Emily had been silent until then. She took a breath and stepped closer, hands twisting, voice small with a sincerity that might have undone me. "Linz, I'm so sorry," she said. "I should have told you about the meetings. I should have told you they asked me to keep you busy. I kept thinking it wasn't my place, that they'd fix it, that it wasn't as serious as it looked. I was a coward. Please forgive me. Please." Her eyes shone, and I recognized the girl from the dorm who'd made me laugh with a cheap face mask on and a bad haircut. It hurt in a familiar place. My father cut across her. "We're not here for feelings. We're here to solve a problem." He pulled a folded document from his pocket and placed it on top of Rebecca's folder. "You'll sign this draft retraction. In return, we'll make you whole." His gaze raked the apartment like a cross-examination. "You're struggling. Like you always have been. We can spare you that." I felt the heat climb my face. It was shocking, the nothing that followed. And then I heard my own voice before I decided to speak. "Loyalty does not mean allowing you to steal and betray." My mother sobbed. "Steal?" she gasped. "How dare you say that about your father? About your sister?" "Because it's true," I stated. "Because I have the documents. Because you restricted my access and used my best friend to keep me busy while you hid debts and shuffled money through paper shells. Because you chose the firm over me, and then you chose secrecy over the firm." Rebecca's mouth tightened. "You don't understand the complexity of managing." "I understand enough to know that complexity is not a synonym for fraud." My father's jaw clicked. "How much?" he asked suddenly. "Tell me the number. We'll end this, and you can play entrepreneur to your heart's content." I looked at him, the man whose voice could still make a room go smaller. "You can't give me what I want." I picked up the unsigned retraction, folded it once, and set it aside. "You think money will fix this? It won't. I already have something more valuable, self-respect." For the first time since they arrived, he looked almost startled. Not moved, startled, like he'd expected me to speak a dialect we no longer shared. His nostrils flared. "You're making a catastrophic mistake." Emily reached for my hand. "Please," she whispered. "I'll go with you tomorrow. I'll tell them everything. I was wrong. I was wrong." I pulled my hand back gently. "Then tell them. To them. Not to me." I wanted to add that forgiveness wasn't a coupon she could redeem at my door, but cruelty wasn't the point. "I'm not the one you lied to." Silence stretched. Outside, a car horn bleated twice, distant as another life. My mother sank into a chair without asking, tissue wadded in her fist, looking around my apartment as if trying to find proof I'd been living poorly enough to make all this understandable. Rebecca straightened the edge of the folder she'd brought, habit beating back panic. My father weighed strategies behind his eyes. "It's over," I said softly. "Whatever you think you can negotiate, it's already out of your hands." He stared at me long enough to turn it into a contest. Then he stood. "So, you've declared war on your own family." "No," I replied. "You declared war on the truth and lost the right to call it family when you locked me out of your house and sat my friend in my chair." I opened the door. The hallway air rushed in, cool and ordinary. "I won't be your shield." They filed out in an order that felt rehearsed by blood, my father first, a soldier retreating with dignity, Rebecca next, chin up, folder tight to her side, my mother last, pausing to touch my arm and then thinking better of it. Emily lingered, eyes searching mine for the version of us that had always been so easy. But I didn't have it to give. "Just tell the truth," I said, not unkindly. She nodded, a small, decisive tilt. "I will." And then she was gone. I closed the door and stood with my palm on the wood as if testing whether it would hold. The apartment was suddenly large and quiet, and I realized the shaking in my hands had stopped. I poured a glass of water and drank it all, then placed the empty glass on the counter with care. On the muted TV, a caption crawled, "Shares suspended. Firm pledges cooperation." My phone buzzed once, "Jason. Tomorrow 10 a.m. Formal statements." Another buzz, "Dana from Atlanta. We stand by our decision to work with you. Take care of yourself." I exhaled into the stillness and watched the air leave my body as if it, too, had been waiting for my answer. A year is a strange unit of measure. When the headlines finally moved on from our last name, the real consequences remained, heavy and domestic. Russell & Sons became Russell Legal Holdings for 3 months, then R&Co, on a temporary website no one trusted. Partners resigned quietly, then loudly. A restructuring firm with a sterile logo camped in the corner office with laptops and brittle smiles. Stability, their press release said. The partners called it breathing room. Everyone else called it fallout. My father stopped going to the office the day they fitted the monitor around his ankle. House arrest sounds polite until you witness the way it shrinks a person. You can't iron pride back into a man who must ask permission to cross his own threshold. He exercised in tight laps of the living room and pretended he preferred the view from the den. When Alex visited, he said the curtains stayed closed even at noon and the television was always on, but low, like a conscience you can't quite silence. "We don't speak now, my father and I." I sent no letters. I returned none. The last thing he ever said to me in person was that line about catastrophe. It took me months to realize he was right about the event, wrong about the person. The catastrophe wasn't mine. My mother disappeared in a slower, subtler way. She left the clubs first, resigned from committees with notes about family needs, returned RSVP cards with neat regrets, boxed the hats and gloves like fragile fossils. People said she'd taken up gardening, but really she took up distance. When I glimpsed her once at the market, she was not styled for viewing. Her pearls were in a dish at home, her hair unlacquered. She saw me, and we stood an aisle apart with our hands on separate carts, both of us suddenly ordinary. She nodded. I nodded. And that was enough. Rebecca's fall wasn't a public spectacle so much as a correction. The big firm emails stopped. The LinkedIn update appeared with a smaller logo from a practice in a brick building above a bakery. She works there now, drafting standard agreements for real clients who pay real invoices. Alex says she's good at it when she isn't trying to win every conversation, and that sometimes he sees her walking to her car at dusk looking like a person who is trying to learn how to be just a person. I don't hate her. I don't wish her harm. But I learned to stop narrating her choices in my head the way I used to when I wanted a different sister to appear. Emily wrote to me in bursts. Apologies arrived like weather fronts, long messages at night, smaller ones in the morning, silence for weeks, then a photograph of a park bench where we used to eat lunch with a caption that only said, "Remember." The first time, I typed a response and then deleted it word by word until the screen was blank again. The second time I wrote, "I know you're sorry. I also know what it cost me to learn it." The third time, I didn't reply at all. Our friendship ended without a scene, like a song turned down so slowly you don't notice the moment you can no longer hear it. I moved to Charleston in June, into a narrow house with a copper roof. It isn't grand, but it's mine, and it creaks in the honest ways. There's a porch that faces a quiet street, a maple that throws generous shade, a kitchen that accepts the smell of garlic like a compliment. I picked out sensible furniture and one extravagant rug that looks like a small storm of reds and blues. On the first night, I slept on the floor with a rolled towel under my head and woke to sunlight fanning across with like a blessing I hadn't realized I was allowed to ask for. My chosen family grew the way real things do, awkwardly, then all at once. Alex drives down twice a month with pound cake from a bakery that still knows his order. Jason meets me on Thursdays at a coffee shop that roasts beans until the whole block smells like forgiveness. He never asks about Savannah unless I bring it up, and when he does, he asks like someone willing to listen to the boring parts. The colleagues who stayed with my agency bring their dogs to the office on Fridays, and their best ideas, when deadlines, chew the edges of our patience. My neighbor, Mrs. Pike, is 70 and curses like a sailor. She waters my plants when I travel and pretends she didn't. There's a kid next door who skateboarded past the porch a dozen times before asking if the pie on the railing was for real. Now he mows my small patch of grass with an intensity that makes me wonder what he's trying to outrun. On cool nights, the porch gathers people like a magnet. Alex arguing with Jason about music, Mrs. Pike telling us which neighbors are secretly saints, my team discussing whether a tagline can be both truthful and kind. We eat too much, we laugh too loudly, and every so often I feel a quiet gratitude settle like a shawl across my shoulders. Thanksgiving came early this year, in the sense that I started planning in September. I wanted the day to be simple and abundant, which is another way of saying I wanted to rewrite the memory without lying to it. I set the table with a cloth I found at a consignment shop, indigo with a thin white border. I polished the hand-me-down silver until I could see the shape of the person I have become. I cooked what I could and ordered what I couldn't. Turkey brined overnight, cornbread dressing the way Nana did it, with more celery than anyone admits, Brussels sprouts roasted to the edge of char, sweet potatoes with a top that cracked under the spoon. And I baked the strawberry pie because love is sometimes insisting on dessert. They arrived as the house filled with that good, forgiving heat, Alex carrying wine and a joke, Jason with a grocery bouquet and 2 extra folding chairs, my colleagues with foil-covered dishes, and the kind of appetites that make you think the world is still survivable. Mrs. Pike came last, in a sweater with a turkey so bedazzled it might have been visible from space, declaring that she'd only stay an hour and then anchoring herself to the good chair like a barnacle. The kid with the skateboard brought a store-bought pumpkin pie and an apology for not baking, which we told him was unnecessary both because it was and because it delighted him to hear. Before we ate, I looked at all of them, mismatched, laughing, loud, exhausted, alive. I felt a pinch behind my eyes that I allowed and then let go. I lifted my glass. The room settled into that soft, anticipatory hush you only get when everyone has decided to listen. Your real family isn't the ones who share your last name, I said, the words tasting true as I spoke them, but the ones who stay by your side when you're hurting the most. There was a murmur, then the loose clatter of cutlery, then the rise of conversation again, braid of voices and clinks and the happiness that arrives when people trust a table. When the house finally exhaled and everyone drifted to doorways with their coats half on, Mrs. Pike kissed my cheek and said, "You did good, Lindsay." It took me a beat to understand she meant more than the menu. Later, alone with the lamp low and the rug catching a scatter of crumbs, I washed the pie dish and set it to dry. People ask if I miss my family. I miss the idea of us, the imagined holidays where nobody flinches at a sentence, the kitchen where love doesn't have conditions attached. But missing isn't the same as wanting back what broke you. What I want is this, a life where the table is wide enough for the people who actually show up, where self-respect isn't a private hobby, but the ground under every step, where forgiveness is a door I open when I'm ready and not a hallway I'm chased down. The night drifted toward quiet. Outside, the streetlight spilled a small halo onto the sidewalk. I turned off the lamp and stood for a moment in the easy dark, certain in a way I had not been for years. A year ago, I thought the point of no return was a door closing in my face. Now I know it was the moment I decided to be the person who would never again ask permission to tell the truth. Never let even your closest friends and family decide who you should be. Never hand over the power to define your worth. Not to a parent. Not to a sibling. Not even to a friend who knows your secrets. The only one who gets to decide who you are is you. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated, betrayed, or cast aside by the very people who were supposed to love you most? Did you stay silent, or did you fight back? Tell me your own story in the comments below. I read every single one because your voice matters here. And if you felt even a flicker of strength in my words, do me a favor, hit that like and subscribe buttons. You're joining a community where pain turns into power and betrayal becomes the first step toward freedom.